member associations of Canada, Mexico and USA have been selected.
Hello everyone, thank you for joining us to another session. In this session we have the giant professor, Professor Pascal Courty, the professor from University of Victoria, that we will talk about the sport mega events economy. Pascal, thank you for helping us.
First time in the history of the World Cup.
I'm a professor of economics at the University of Victoria, and I work in sports economics and also economics of events and cultural economics more broadly. So today, Madi asked me to talk about the economics of the economic impact of sporting events, and we're going to focus on what people call mega events. So let's first define what is a mega event. So it will be an event that has a high level of tourism, so quite a few out of country or out of province visitors. Significant media coverage, meaning that they're going to be broadcasting rights that will be sold, and that's going to be a big part of the value. And these mega events will. We'll talk a little bit more about that, but they will have some kind of a prestige or branding associated to the city that hosts these mega events, and they typically will involve the entire country where the event takes place. So we're talking mostly about the Olympics and Soccer World Cup. And what economists have looked at, sports economists and people in management, sports management, they have looked at what is the impact of these events and what are the benefits for the host city and the host country. And what we're going to see, it's a quite difficult question to answer. And you could look at, like employment. Is there a short-term or long-term impact on employment, on income? You could look at GDP or earning per capita, on sales, on tourism, investment, exports. People have looked at lots of outcomes. But basically, that's the way we want to think about it. We want to think about these events. We want to think about what is their impact and whether these events are from an economic perspective, a good thing to have. So here is a table of the events that people have looked at. So you see we have different columns. We have the Summer Olympics, the Winter Olympics in the second column, and then the Men's World Cup. And so as you see, there are not so many of these events. So from if you want, from an empirical perspective, to learn about these events is not trivial, because on the table probably you have 20 to 30 events of that magnitude, right? So if you add you can also add the UEFA Cup. You can add the Pan American Games and the Commonwealth Game, but still you will not. These are fairly rare events. So we'll see the kind of difficulty that this poses to understand the impact. So what I plan to do is to follow what the literature has done, and the literature has taken two different approaches to understand the impact of mega sporting events. So we'll use the acronym MSC, mega sporting events. One is to just do a basic cost-benefit analysis, like you would do in project analysis or in corporate finance. Another one is to say, okay, maybe these events have a bigger impact on the whole country, and you want to look for whether it changed things in the long term in the country where this event took place. And then we'll talk about other issues that are left out from this kind of hardcore economic analysis. So what I will do at the end, I will also talk a little bit about sports leagues. So here's going to be mostly about North American. So we're going to be talking about the major sports league, like American football, basketball, hockey, and baseball. And the reason for that is that there is a lot of analogies, and the beauty of this American sports league is that you have much more data, because you have 4 leagues. These leagues have many teams, and the issue is going to be, the analogy is going to be that if you're a city, do you want to have one of these sports leagues? Meaning, do you want to be the one hosting? Do you want to build a stadium and to welcome, let's say, if you would be in Vancouver, do you want to have the Canucks in Vancouver? And the problem is going to be similar. And the beauty of sports league is that there's much more data. We have lots and lots of teams, lots and lots of cities bidding for teams moving cities quite frequently. So we can also draw some conclusions from that, and we'll see that if you're not convinced by the conclusion that I show you about the Olympic Games and the World Cup, the sports league probably going to add some new insights. So let's. So basically, the question is, should we do it? Let's say you're a country or you're a city and you're approached to host one of these events. And here we're talking about mega events, but it could be a smaller event. And the issue is, how do you want to think about it? And should you do it? Should you host that event? Is it something that you think is good? So you could take the first approach would be to say, okay, I'm going to take a blunt economic analysis. So I'm going to do cost benefit. So it's a bit like an accounting approach. You treat the event as a project. They're going to be a cost associated with it, and they're going to be benefits associated with it. And you're going to take the project if the benefits are greater than the cost, and you want to know overall what should you expect, right? What kind of returns should you expect? And the other approach is to say, well, these events are so big that maybe we want to look beyond the project itself. Maybe they're going to have an impact on the economy of the host country. And if you invest $10 billion, which is kind of the cost of the current mega sporting events, in the ballpark, you might want to say, well, and that's what you hear. That's what you hear in the media. That's what you hear by politicians. They're going to tell you, oh, this is going to have a good impact on the economy. This is going to improve employment. This is going to improve GDP. This is going to improve tax, and so on and so forth. So that's the other approach. You see, you don't treat the event as a project, but you say, oh, the event is going to have such a big impact on the economy. You want to look at the entire economy. So let's look at, I'm going to cover a couple of studies that people have looked, and there are many others, right? We're talking about probably roughly hundreds of economic analysis of these events. People look at different outcomes. They look at different set of events. And so I'm just going to cover a couple, and after I'm going to draw some general conclusions. So the current study here was published by Muller, Gogishvili, and Wolf in the Journal of Sports Economics in 2022. And what they do is that they take 43 Olympic Games and World Cups between 1964 and 2018. And they have 14 Summer Games, 15 Winter Games, and 14 World Cups. And they look at these events as an investment project. So they're going to look at cost. And in cost, they're going to be operational cost. Things are moving now. So I'm going to go back to the slide. So they're going to look at operational cost. They're going to look at the cost of building infrastructure. And after, they're going to look at the revenues. And the revenues, it's going to be mostly broadcasting rights, sponsorship, and ticket sales. So here is a way to think of cost and revenue streams. So if you think of the Olympic Games, you want to think about three levels of analysis. One is for the committee that auction, if you want, that decide which country is going to host the Olympic Games. And then you have the local organizing committee. So that's going to be in the country. You're going to have the delegation that organize the games itself. And after, you're going to have the host government. And each of these entities is going to have different costs and benefits. And that's what this is trying to emphasize. You see, the key here is that the international committee typically gets the broadcasting rights and the international sponsorship. They negotiate that, and they're going to transfer money to the organizing committee. The organizing committee typically going to receive most of the ticketing sales and the licensing, but they're going to bear all the operational costs. The international committee won't have so many costs, just the running cost of running these, both for FIFA and the Olympic Games, just the cost of running the organization. And then the host government is going to have to basically deal with a lot of the infrastructure costs. So basically dealing with making sure the venues are there, all the infrastructure is here, and security is working. So you see, that's going to be the general theme. You see, you have different revenue and different costs. And these are collected and disbursed by different level of the in the organization. So now here is one of the main slides of the main results of this work is to so you see here what we have split these 43 events in 3 categories: summer, winter, and World Cup. So these are the 3 panels you see there. And then what you see, the blue bars with the plus are the revenues and broken down by broadcast, sponsorship, and ticketing, which are the main source of revenue. And in red, you have the costs, organizational cost and venue infrastructure cost. And what you can already see by just eyeballing this figure is that the red is much greater than the blue, meaning that most of these events lose money, and it's all in billions of dollars. And throughout history, so what you also see is that over time, when you go from left to right, the revenue increase and the cost increase. So these events become bigger and bigger things, but despite that, despite the revenue growing, the costs are growing at a faster pace. So they're still losing money. So that's the first bad news, right? If you look at the just cost and revenue, typically the revenue is greater than the cost. Now you can do it per athlete, and you get the following graphs, and you can see here these revenue per athlete and cost per athlete. So you see they're growing over time. These events cost at a faster pace than inflation. So it means these are becoming bigger and bigger things over time. But despite that, the red is always greater than the blue, right? Meaning that the costs are greater than the revenue, meaning that a loss is made. And you can do it by tickets sold, and so that basically, if you want like the experience, right, that would be the value of the tickets sold, and same thing, the value goes up. Now, that's kind of the summary figure that shows that not all events are made the same. And you see here we are plotting all these events where we put on the horizontal axis the cost, and the vertical axis the return on investment. So return on investment would be the revenue minus the cost divided by the cost. And so you can see that you want to be in the top right, because in the top right you have a positive return. Top left is also okay. These are smaller events, but the top right is the big events with positive returns. So there is really like the big, like you take a lot of risk and you make money. But as you can see, most events are in the bottom part of the panel. So most lose money, and there are just a couple of exceptions that make money. It's the Sydney Olympics and the 2000 and the Russia 2018 Winter Olympics. And then smaller events, the Vancouver 2010 did okay, and the Atlanta 96 did okay. But you can see a lot of events did very, very poorly. So these are the conclusion of this first piece of work. The average return on investment is minus, yes, you heard me well, minus 38%. So the event cost much more, on average 2.8 billion than what the return is, 1.7 billion. And again, it's an average over a long period, and these are corrected for inflation, but because the cost of these events and the revenue of these events has increased a lot over time, the current events, the numbers are bigger, right? Because these are becoming bigger and bigger enterprises. Then some events have lost a lot of money, like the Montreal Summer Olympics are famous for that. And some events have made a reasonable return, but on average, it's not financially sustainable. However, and that's something I want to point out, for the FIFA and for the IOC, so the organization that own the rights for these events and allocates these events through an auction, actually these make money. These people make money. So FIFA makes money and the IOC make money. The organizing committee typically breaks even or doesn't make so much money. And typically the government, the local government, are stuck with the bill of building all this infrastructure, and they are the one who lose quite a bit. So the next piece of work I want to discuss is looking at the impact. So here, what we're interested in is to study whether these big events, national events, change something on the local host economy. And so what's going to happen is once the committee decides which country or which city will host the event, they're going to be an announcement phase, and things could start to change, right? Maybe just once we know that the next Olympics will take place, let's say in Asia or in Middle East, already, you could argue that some people start to invest because they expect to get, even though the event's going to happen in 4, 5, 6 years, it could have a triggering as soon as it's announced. Or you could look at the event phase, so that's when the event starts, and then you could look at post-event. So you see, it's a little tricky to look for an impact, right? When you look for an impact, there is the announcement date, and then there's when the event takes place, and then there's a year after. So here, these authors, they take 4 events, and they take the Brazil World Cup, the Vancouver Olympic Games, and the London Summer Olympics, and the South Africa FIFA World Cup. And you see, they're going to say, okay, so we knew that the event would take place so many years before. And then in 2004, the FIFA World Cup takes place. And then let's see what happened after. So that's the idea here. We're trying to think of the event as a country receive a treatment, right? They receive something positive potentially and want to see if this treatment has an effect. And people have done that for these mega events. Like we said before, it's a bit difficult to do because you don't have so many of these events. And it's much easier to do that for a large sports league. But let's look at what these people did. So these people, they take these 4 events. And what they do is that they look at the GDP. Here, they're looking at growth rate, economic growth rate. So they're looking at GDP per capita. And they look at, they take the country where the event took place. So that's treated, if you want. That's the one that received the positive treatment. And then they construct what you call control groups. So you're trying to identify similar countries, and you are looking at these countries in before and after the event. And so that's what you're going to compare. You're going to compare the treated country with a set of control groups. And this is quite sophisticated, what you can do there. And so what you get here is that the black line is the country that received the event, that hosted the event. And the band, if you want, like the shaded area, is these other countries, which would be control group, right? They didn't receive the event, but they're very similar to the one who received the event. If you want, they could be the one who lost the competition, lost the bid, or they could be neighborhood cities which have similar economic condition. So what would you expect is that if hosting the Olympics or the FIFA World Cup would be really good for GDP, you would expect the black line to be the same before the treatment date, so the gray vertical line on the graph. And so the two should be very similar, which is the case, right? It's the case. You can see on the left of the gray vertical line, the black line looks very similar to the shaded area and to the average, which is the dotted blue line. But what you would expect is that after the treatment, the country should do better, and you should expect the black line to shoot up, right? And that should last for a couple of years, right? So here they're looking like 5, 10, 15 years ahead. So you would expect this event to have a permanent, or let's say, non-transitory, right? So something that lasts for a couple of years, and you don't see that here, right? You can see that the black line is really right there with the average and within the bands of what the other countries have done. So it's another look at this, right? You're trying to look at these events from more like a treatment perspective. And here we've looked at GDP. You can look at a lot of other outcomes, and typically you're going to find no significant effect of hosting sports mega events on economic growth. So it doesn't have what a lot promises, that is going to have a boost on employment, on growth. At least we don't find that in the data. This conclusion is widespread. For some outcomes like tourism, you do find a small impact, although not for all events, and it's not a major growth in tourism. And so now the issue you might want to ask yourself is, why is this the case? And to answer that, you want to think of what we call the issue of additionality. So when you think of hosting a sports event, yes, for sure, there are a lot of people coming, and there's a lot of things going on, right, when the event takes place. That's for sure, right? We're not debating that. But the issue of that additionality is the issue of, would all these things have happened even if the event wouldn't have taken place? So does the event really add things, or is the event just taking attention from other things that would have happened, but because the event took place, they didn't happen? So and then you want to think about substitution, right? So maybe, yes, people go to see the Olympic Games, but if there wouldn't be the Olympic Games or the FIFA World Cup, people would do other things locally, right? They would go to see other games, or there would be things that would have taken place but didn't take place, and took place in these control group countries, right? So that's the idea of substitution, right? Local residents who attend the mega sporting events, instead they would have attended something else. So the mega sporting events just doesn't add new economic activity. It's not like another issue is crowding out. Crowding out is yes, a lot of people come from abroad to see the events, to participate. But maybe because there's the event, people don't come to Paris anymore to visit Paris, right? Some people come for the Olympics, but then the regular visitors, they postpone or they anticipate their visit for pure tourism. So that's the idea of crowding out, right? It's not by local, but it's by external visitors. So crowding out is what we mean when we say that when you do an activity, basically it's at the cost of other people coming, right? So it's slightly different from substitution, but both point to the same issue, that there is no additionality, there is no net additional effect of having the event. And the last one is the issue of leakage. And leakage is the issue that a lot of the studies that tell you that the event's going to do a lot for the economy, they essentially say, okay, so many people will come, they will spend so much on the event, and then after, because all this spending, they're going to be a multiplier effect, right? This spending going to trigger other spending, right? The people with the hotels industry, accommodation industry will anticipate to have lots of visitors, and what they're going to do is that they're going to start to maybe build some new accommodation, or they're going to start to invest more to refurbish their hotels, and that's the issue of how big this multiplier is. And there's a wide consensus that the multipliers that are used in the assessment studies that try to estimate like the impact of these events, that try to sell the events to politicians and to the public before the event takes place, they use way too big multipliers. And that's the issue of related to the issue of leakage. Leakage means that a lot of the money, or some of the money that is spent during the event, might not have a big multiplier. And one reason could be that maybe some of the costs won't even happen in the country, right? It would leak. So you see the idea, it would leak out, right? They would have lots of consultants that might not come from the local economy, or a lot of the expenses will not happen in the local economy. And that's why there's no multiplier there. So that's the paradox. The paradox is that countries and cities bid for these events because the claim is that there is a great economic benefit, but we don't find this benefit in the long term, and a lot of these events actually lose money. So so you might want to wonder. I mean, people have talked about that for a long time, and so it seems the public knows about it. I mean, if you want to get the information is fairly public, right? So the issue, you could say, okay, you could ask people, do they want these events? So that's another way to approach the problem, is to say, what about the public, right? So do they really care about the event? And so here we have, again, mixed evidence. So some of these countries, or some of these cities, they run referendum to ask people, do they really want it? And some people are very positive about the potential transformative capacities that these events could have on the urban and regional development. But there's also opposition to mega sporting events. So if you look at here at the referendum, you can see that some referendum basically ended the Olympic candidature, like in Munich and Krakow for the 22 events, and Hamburg for the 24 events, Innsbruck and Grobenberg again in 26 events, and Vienna in the 28 Olympics. So sometimes the public is aware and they don't want the events. Some of these events are in favor of the public, And we want to keep in mind that the referendum is not the end of the story. It's just one element that goes into the decision process. Actually, Los Angeles had initially a referendum against the Summer Olympics, but they overcame that negative referendum, and they ended up to host the event. And vice versa, some Olympic plans sometimes are withdrawn despite a positive public opinion. So here it's another look at it. We want to know what do people think about these mega events. So you might be concerned that I've talked only about economic outcomes, and so here to conclude on these studies, I present some first the outcome that people have looked at, and then I will look at those that are more difficult to measure, but people have also considered, but not with the same kind of number crunching quantitative approach. So you can see people have looked at positive economic impact like economic activity, job, labor supply, living standards, income, and they also have looked at environmental impact. They've looked at the infrastructure. They have looked at people have also looked at the impact on pollution, and on the negative side, people have recognized that these events also sometimes have negative impact, issue with congestion, possibly crime, security, increase in debt, and impose a tax burden on the host country, and possibly they're not the best use of the public funds. And people have looked at negative impact on the environment and pollution, overcrowding. So you see, people have looked at a wide range of outcomes for these events. And despite the fact that there are a lot of positive value that you could think of, right, like image or branding or public support, feel good, there's also some negative ones. And here you can add even more. So in social impact here, you can see that it makes people more proud of the city, and you can increase long-term visitors. You can have a higher international image, and so on and so forth. These are hard to measure, and you'll see when we look at when we're going to conclude with the study of sports league, we're going to see there you can say more because you have much better data. And you can see there's limited effect for all these other dimensions. So I don't want to ignore the fact that these events are not only about economics; they're also their social, psychological, and political impact. And but I'm going to argue that these probably they will not completely reverse your conclusion that the cost of these events greatly outdo the benefits. So. And before I conclude, there's unfortunately people haven't looked at smaller sports events, because smaller sports events probably they don't have the limitation of mega events where you have to build a lot of infrastructure, and so possibly also there's more involvement of people, and there is a closer connection between the people who host the event and the organizers of the event itself. So unfortunately, there's not a lot of research on smaller events. And here, talking about infrastructure, if you think, for example, of the Olympic Stadium in Montreal, it was extremely costly, so costly that people call it a white elephant. And after, it would have been economic, it would have been probably there was little use for this facility. And so the one option was to just destroy it, right, and use the land for something else. But however, it would cost more to destroy it than just to maintain it. So people just kept it. But you see, these are what these mega events are associated with, these very costly mistakes that have little these investments that have little returns over the years, and actually you're stuck with these facilities that cost you and over many years. So let me talk briefly about and conclude with that about North American leagues. So North American leagues here, the issue is similar with the mega events, but it's a different setup. The issue is, if you're a city, do you want to build a stadium for a team? and it would be a dedicated stadium. It could be a very, very large stadium, or it could be a smaller one. And and you would use that to host, if it would be basketball or hockey, would be like an arena, and it would have typically between 10 to 20,000 capacity. And if it would be for baseball or American football, it would be more like 50,000. It would be called a stadium. And these are quite costly to build. Also, there's quite a big obsolescence, right? You can see that these facilities last about 30 to 40 years, and after the teams, they typically shop around for a new venue, because there's been a huge change in how these venues are designed, and mostly to accommodate these very fancy visitors, that they want this nice box, and the stadium is designed differently with much more comfortable, and to improve the experience. So the old stadium from like 50 or 70 years ago, they are typically much less popular, and that's why we keep on building new stadium to accommodate the demand for a better experience, better quality stadium, that and especially also for the super high end suites that are actually extremely profitable for the very rich people that watch the game from the very top of the stadium. So so that's a question we're going to ask. And again, here you could ask the same. It's the same issues, right, that we had before. Is to say, like, if you want to host a team, you need a stadium, and the issue, if you live in that city, or if you are the mayor of that city, is, do you want to bankroll the stadium? Do you want to subsidize the stadium? And it's gonna be quite a huge investment, and you want to ask yourself, is this worth it? So let's look at the evidence. So essentially, you can see that, like we said, in North America, there's still a lot of stadium and arenas being built over the year. And there was a big boom in the 90s and 2000. And so this graph plots the number of new stadium opened. And so you see every year there's about between 2 to 5 new stadium on average that are open. Now, we're looking now, the question here is, how much of the cost of this venue is borne by the city or by the taxpayers? And here you can see the fraction of the cost, and every dot is for each of these venue, what fraction was borne by the taxpayer. And but you can look at the dotted line. The dotted line is an average, because some of these are fully funded by the privately funded, but some of them are fully funded by the taxpayer, and some are in the middle. You can see on average, essentially about it used to be 100% on average was funded mostly by the taxpayer, and then now it's more 50% in closer to last decade. That being said, the cost of these venues have increased a lot because of what I just talked about. People used to sit on concrete, and they used to have a very simple accommodation. And now the seats are fancier. Some of the stadium, you can even close them, you can heat them, you can have better air quality, you have better sound and video options, you have better food, you have better everything, right? So you think about this stadium as something that the quality has increased dramatically. And that's, you're going to see in the next graph. You see here the cost. So the previous graph was a share borne by taxpayer. This graph shows you the total cost of arena and stadium, and it's split by the cost borne by the public and the cost borne by the privately, right, by the teams and the league. And as you can see, you want to look at the solid gray and the solid black rectangles. And despite the fact that the private share funded has increased, you can see this is in percentage, right? But in absolute term, the taxpayer are still paying more and more for these venues. So that's, you can see the black rectangle and the gray rectangle are increasing over time. Still, they bore a smaller fraction. They bear a small fraction of the cost. So this is the issue here. The issue is that the taxpayer and the government, the local government, give massive subsidies to teams, to host teams. And you might ask yourself why, and maybe again it's because there are economic benefits or social benefits to having a team in your city. And so if you look at income per capita, and you could look at the income in the city, or you could look at the income in the state, or you could look at the income in a very local area, you find, at least if you look at the state level or city level, you find no impact. Now, if you look at the very local level, you're going to find local small impact. So hotels and local sales will increase, right? So having a stadium is going to increase mostly in tourism industry, tourism sales. Now, you can say, oh, that's not satisfying. So people have looked at lots of other outcomes like employment, investment, new businesses, and you find very little impact or no impact. Now, another way to proceed, you see the beauty if you look at a sports league, because you have so many teams, right? You have, taking the 4 leagues, you have dozens of teams, right? Not 100, but close to that. And they change cities, right? And these leagues have expanded over time. So new teams join these leagues. And so you see you have lots of events of a city bidding for teams, and teams switching cities or new team joining the league. And so you can do better statistical analysis. And now you can ask yourself, well, if there's really benefit for having a team in your city, right? If it's really beneficial, you should see it, for example, in the property values, right? So that would be, you would say the real estate around the stadium, or the value of real estate in the city should go up. And you don't find that. You find, sometimes you find very small effect that can definitely not justify the level of subsidy. And you also have to take into account that there are also negative intangible impact like crime, congestion, and pollution associated with having a big venue. So the conclusion is that there is little to no tangible impact of sports teams and facilities on local economic activity, and the level of venue subsidy typically provided far exceed any subsidy given in other industries. So one way to look at that here is that you look at how much the city has subsidized the team to join, to become the team of that city, and you find that the level of these subsidies is way above what the government typically give, let's say, to attract, let's say, a factory that makes microprocessors, or let's say batteries, like it's done currently, right? So you look at the fraction of the funds given as a fraction of labor, and here you're going to find that for sports, you look at even though the players are paid a lot of money, if you look at the subsidy of the government as a fraction of what the player earns, it's much higher than for any industry. So you're left with a puzzle, and you call that the public funding paradox. The public funding paradox is to say that why does this continue? Why is this still happening? And because by now this has been going on for decades, and the public is well informed, politicians are well informed, and so if we take, for example, the Atlanta Braves, they received $300 million to build the Trust Park in Atlanta. So the city of Atlanta gave them $300 million, and these represent 11% of the teams observed and expected post stadium salary over the next 20 years. So it means they receive a massive subsidy, and we don't find a significant impact on the local economy. And so you might ask yourself why, and then you want to think of a couple of things. And I think that's going to be an important takeaway of the talk. One is that the people who are pushing for having these mega sporting events, or having hosting a team, they are typically the team owners, or the people who own the FIFA or the Olympic Committee, and so they are creating. They are kind of, if you want, monopolists, right? There are very few of them. They are unique, and they are scarce, and they are dealing with very dispersed decision makers who could be basically it's very hard for these decision makers to understand the true economics of the decision, and so these organizers can influence they have a huge interest to lobby these cities and to lobby this government to host the event. And that's what you see. You see what they're gonna do is that they're typically gonna sponsor some high-profile advocacy reports that gonna promise extremely high returns and ignoring what we call the additionality problem, meaning that they're gonna promise high returns that will not materialize, that you won't find in the data. And you see the issue is that you have these unique events or these unique teams that have some kind of monopoly power, and they're going to create some kind of a bidding, right? Typically, they're going to be a bidding through an auction mechanism, and they're going to let these cities try to outbid each other. And in this situation, sometimes, especially when it's a decision that is not made very often in this auction setup, when you have a single seller with multiple bidders, you can see mistake made, and you believe the numbers. You think it's a good idea to have these mega events, and then it turns out not to work out so well. So let me conclude. So overall, we find a small economic impact of mega sporting events on economic outcomes. In many of these studies, we find no impact at all. There is for sure a structural deficit, and it's not the outcome of ignorance, right? Because we know about these by now. We know about that we tend to typically underestimate cost and overestimate benefits. So the conclusion is that these events are not financially viable in and of themselves, and I think the explanation for why this is still going on is that there is a strong bargaining position of FIFA and the IOC. And however, on the positive note, is that if you ignore the infrastructure investment, and that's true both for the sports league and for FIFA and the IOC, the cities that have typically not lost money are the cities that did not make significant investment in infrastructure. So that's a positive note. Local organizers should beware not to, you can host one of these events, but do not commit for building this massive infrastructure that possibly will not be used later or will be used for very low return activities. Thank you very much for listening to me. And yes, let's open the floor for questions.
3 host countries, 16 host cities.
The moment we've all been waiting for.